Today on the podcast, Andrea, who co-hosted Gay Pirate News Hour with me on December 7th, has sent in her narration of the first 2 chapters of Up, Down, Turnaround by Shearwater. This is Andrea's first ever podfic narration, so let's be sure to give her plenty of encouragement and support. Up, Down, Turnaround by Shearwater is part of the Temptation verse. It's a modern AU where Ed is an artist and Stede is a bookseller. Those leaving comments on this fic love how Ed's midlife crisis and ADHD brain are rendered. I think you'll love what Andrea has done with this one. But before we get into this fic, quick reminder that you are welcome to send in your own narrations of your favorite fanfics. Just get the author's permission first and email the audio file to ourflagmeansfanfiction@gmail.com. Also be sure to check out this week's Haunted Hollywood Hour. Friday's episode covers an actual UFO abduction that happened in the 1950s in Tujunga Canyon near Los Angeles. The main people involved were all lesbians, so that's why this incident isn't talked much about in UFO lore. But I give you all the details from this out-of-print book on the subject, so you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into Up, Down, Turnaround by Shearwater, read by Andrea.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to share with you one of the most beautiful and wonderful fan fictions I've ever come across. It is called Up, Down, Turnaround by Shearwater, Shear Water. It's part of the Temptation verse, and the complementary work is called Constellationism, which is a work in progress. Up, Down, Turnaround is completed. And there is an existing podfic of both Up, Down, Turnaround and Constellationism by Ninja Knitter, which is really wonderful. But I wanted to do my own recording because I think that this fanfiction is such a piece of art that it deserves to be honored in as many ways as possible by as many people as possible. So that brings me here right now. So with all that preamble, let's go ahead and get into Up, Down, Turnaround, Chapter 1, Something Cool. Relax your face. My face is relaxed. You never saw a face this relaxed. Look at this thing. Ed let his mouth fall slightly open, hurt his jaw a little bit. I am looking at it. Evelyn gestured to her own face, copying his alleged screwed-up expression with an intensity he thought was pretty rude, actually. It's scowling at me. You're gonna crack a tooth. Fuck off, I'm serene. She regarded him over the top of her teeny tiny coffee cup. You'll give yourself a migraine again. Relax your damn face. Ed made a noise like a slow puncture and slouched lower in his chair, boots scuffing against the table leg. Evelyn remained the picture of elegance, Veronica Lake hair falling perfectly to one side, poised and put together as ever. A lovely shell around the swirling vortex of chaos that lay within. A satisfying secret to keep, that one. You'd never know to look at her that she'd spent the 90s careening around the world at Ed's side, lurching between the stars and the gutter, crashing off sticky tabletops because they were dancing to Lil' Kim and got carried away. She'd calmed down a lot. He had too, in some ways. She was a reassuring presence, even when she was telling him off. Setting her cup neatly back on its saucer, she pulled her handbag onto her lap and began rifling through it with efficient little flicking movements. Nestled in the folds of the soft black leather was a metal triangle with the designer's name on it. It glinted at Ed, caught his eye, and pinged off something inside his brain. Shiny, shiny, sang the song in his head. Shiny boots of... Nah. He tapped his palm to make it stop. Kept the triangle in his head, though. Rotated it. He thought about napped flint arrowheads and shark's teeth instead. About Pythagoras, little Samos boy showered in gemstones. The Wahanuri at home. A silver-leaf ocean rolling under the finest slice of moon. He filed the images away for later, back at the studio. Interesting. Might be a thing. Maybe he'd go down Old Bond Street on his way home, too. Call in at Prada and see if they had something cool that he could wear around town for a bit and then get paint on. Heh. Here. Evelyn produced a business card from the depths of her bag and handed it over, nail polished the color of old blood. "This is your contact at MoMA." "I don't need this," he said, trying to give it back. "It's in my phone." "This is for you to put in your pocket and forget about. Then when you lose your phone, ta-da!" "I'm not going to lose my phone," he scoffed. "Ed, every time you go to New York, you lose your phone. Humor me." "Fine." He shrugged and put the card in his pocket. No skin off his nose. Lose his phone? Pfft, he never lost his phone. Sometimes he turned his phone off and told people he'd lost it, but that was a completely different thing. "I don't know what it is about that city that makes you... God, your shoulders are worse than your face. Go get a massage or something. Jesus." "Nah." "I can give you the number from my healer if you like. You're probably tense because you're misaligned." She leaned back in her seat, scrutinizing. "You're blocking your own energy. It's gross, frankly. If I was tense, which I'm not, it'd be because I haven't had a decent sleep in 6 nights. If. Stop telling me I'm tense. It's making me tense." Not sleeping much at night was fine. He was used to that. Usually he managed the odd nap in the daytime to make up for it, but lately that hadn't been working as well as it used to. His body felt the difference. Each night he fell into bed aching. Why the bad sleep? Ed shrugged and stroked a hand over his beard, just long enough to feel nice and scratchy against his fingertips. "Don't know, love. Just the usual. Brain won't shut up." She looked sympathetic for a second, but binned it sharply. "Still don't love being called love, thanks, Ed." "All right, sweetheart." He grinned like a prick. "Ow, don't kick me in the shin. Pointy shoes, man." "I could sleep for 1,000 years," sang the song in his head. Palm tap. "Stop. Stop harassing me in the workplace." "Bit too loud, maybe." A waiter glanced over at them, looking concerned. "So we're calling the Wolseley our workplace now, huh?" she said. Maybe. I mean, I've had worse." He looked around at the soft, sheeny marble gleaming like graphite. Everything clean glass and dark wood beeswax shined. Literally every single place he'd ever worked in his life was significantly worse than this, including his current studio, which he lived in. He stretched his legs out long under the table until his knee creaked, hooked a finger in the sugar bowl, and dragged it closer across the clean white cloth. A sucrose molecule looks like 2 spiders holding hands. Legs? Hands. There were 2s in everything at the moment. It was weird. "Sure, I could live with that," Evelyn said, taking another sip of coffee. "And well done you for avoiding the question." Ed avoided the avoidance. "We'd never have to go to Tesco's again. Just click our fingers," he demonstrated with a flourish. "And pow, Battenberg." "Love that you think I shop at Tesco. God bless." She looked up. A waiter had appeared beside them. "Sir?" "Shit, man, that's impressive." Ed gazed up at him from his slump. "How'd you get here so fast? Incredible skills, this guy." "Thank you, sir." The young man looked between them, evidently thrown by the admiration. He did look pleased, though, slightly bashful even. Cute. He had that look in his eye that people got when they knew who Ed was. "What can I get for you?" "Oh, nothing, mate. Sorry, misunderstanding. My fault." The waiter nodded and turned, maybe a bit reluctantly, to leave. Although, hold on, have you got any Battenberg? They did, as it turned out. Ed got a perfect slab of it, and another café creme. Evelyn got an espresso, and a fond look in her eye when Ed's face lit up in the presence of cake. He gave her 1 pink quadrant of his Battenberg, which she politely pretended not to want, and then wolfed down in one go. They discussed the stellar reviews his Courtauld show had got, and the gallery opening he was going to in Islington that evening. And Ed discovered that if you did it carefully enough, you could get the little silver coffee spoon to stand bolt upright in the sugar bowl, like a lightning strike on a beach. "Ed, focus," Evelyn said. Apparently he wasn't just going to the gallery opening, he was opening the gallery. Maybe he'd get to cut a ribbon with some massive scissors. That'd be cool. Everything went downhill after that, because she started telling him about the financial implications of one of his old paintings coming up for auction at Christie's. So he amused himself by adding up the atoms in a sugar molecule and then whittling down the number. It came to 9, which was annoying. 8 would be fucking beautiful. 8 would turn a sugar molecule looking like a spider into an incredible cosmic joke, a punchline to make sense of everything. Might explode the universe, though. Too perfect. Evelyn had gone quiet. He stopped playing with the sugar. She stopped trying to explain the trois de suite for the 11 millionth time and was looking at him the soft way people looked at him when they were a bit worried. He told her before, it wasn't that he didn't understand trois de suite, it was just that his brain refused to retain it because it was so boring. He pushed the sugar bowl back into its place in the middle of the table, dusted off his hands and folded them demurely across his belly, not touching anything whatsoever. His jaw had tensed itself up again. Oh, Ed. She propped her elbow on the table and her face on her hand. Her earrings were a bright green, peridot maybe, and they looked incredible, glimmering like spring. Ed never had a sister. What are we going to do with you? Put me in a bag and shake me up? That's what my mum used to say. She'd never actually done it, though. Maybe she should have. Might have shook something loose, done them both some good. How are you feeling about the Greenwich project? Ed shrugged. Okay, it's not a big deal. Evelyn was a good agent. She didn't need to bother about him half as much as she did. He would have made her a ton of money anyway. It was nice of her, and she hated being thought of as nice, so he appreciated the concern coming from her even more than he would have done coming from a person who was normal. He was tired now, though, and he didn't really want to talk anymore. I think most people would say that a collaboration with a museum of that size and prestige is kind of a big deal, and we've got a big meeting about it coming up. It's okay if you're feeling it. Meh. Truth was, that was the truth. It really didn't feel like a big deal. It would be nice, actually, if he could up the size of the deal a bit, make it more of a challenge, something to kick against. Maybe he was just going through the motions now. He hoped not. It was hard to tell. Everything was underway, everything under control. Some of the work was out of his reach now, the bigger metal stuff, for instance. Making things with his own hands was best, but for the really massive stuff, he needed the guys at the sculpture foundry. They'd have those pieces ready in a few weeks. Back at his studio, he was working on a monster of a seascape, really huge, something to hang in the big glass heart of the museum. It was going all right. Oil, so it'd take fucking ages to dry. It was so big, it was going to be a nightmare getting it out of the studio when it was finished. Iz could deal with that. He'd almost wish he'd made it bigger, just to annoy him. He let the silence hang, and Evelyn accepted defeat. All right, I can take a hint. You're done. Gathering up her things, she stood, looping her bag over her shoulder. I have to get going anyway. I'll pay on my way out. You take your time. He nodded and stood, gave her a big, silent hug. A good one. Evelyn was fantastic to hug. Because she was tall, you could really go for it without feeling like you were going to squish her. Plus, she smelled of jasmine. Incredible. I'll come by the studio soon, okay? We'll go over everything coming up in the next couple months. She patted the side of his face in farewell. Take care of yourself, Ed. There wasn't much coffee left to linger over, but he managed. He went to the gents, came back, lingered a bit longer, then slowly shrugged his leather jacket on and wound his scarf around his neck, not really looking forward to going outside. Cold today. And he was feeling maybe like he didn't quite know what to do with himself. All of London spread out before him, and he pretty much just wanted to go home. Although he couldn't say he was sure what he'd do when he got there. Wish he was somewhere else, probably. Annoying Iz for a bit might be fun. He could go and do that. Or see if he wanted to come with him to get some food. Not massively sustaining Battenberg. Iz wasn't much into food, though. Ed took him to this fantastic Singaporean place once. Amazing chicken curry. Just a tiny cafe it was, with a primrose yellow frontage and a few metal tables on the pavement. Iz just scarfed his food down and went back to talking about post-Brexit canvas supply issues. Fucking boring again. Was he forgetting what it was like not to be bored? Heaps of tables and punters and cake stands and waitstaff stood between him and the Piccadilly crush outside. He wove his way through as best he could and was nearly at the door when he heard a polite cough behind him. Excuse me, Mr. Teach? It was the waiter from earlier, the cute one with the teleportation skills. He was smiling shyly. Oh, hello. Yes, mate? Ed cocked his head ever so slightly to the side and looked at the young man intensely. If he did it just right, people usually got a bit... Yeah, there we go. Flustered. Bingo. Oh, sorry. The waiter pushed a strand of dark hair out of his face. We're not supposed to really, do this, but I'm such an admirer of your work. Thought Ed. He smiled down at the guy and felt unbelievably some of the tension in his shoulders begin to unwind. I was just wondering, the guy was fishing around in the pocket of his apron, if it wouldn't be too much of a bother if I could possibly get your autograph, please? All right, I could work with that. Not what he was expecting, but nice. There was something sweetly old-fashioned about it. Not a selfie, an autograph. Sure, Ed inched a fraction closer, just giving the guy a friendly loom, making him tilt his head back and bare his throat the tiniest bit. What have you got for me? The guy's lips parted ever so slightly. Soft. To sign. Ed's new friend seemed to be having a bit of trouble swallowing and took a moment to reply. Oh, well, I know it's weird, sorry, but I've actually got, this. He pulled from his apron pocket a slightly battered postcard. It was a copy of his own painting, Storm 4. Ed took it gently from his hand, turned it over. Souvenir from his Courtauld exhibition, the one that had just closed. There was a trace of blue tack in each corner. He ran his finger over one of the marks. I keep it stuck on the door of my locker usually, the guy said slightly apologetically. It's my absolute favorite painting in the world. Ed blinked, trying to clear away the feeling of unreality that still, even after all these years, came over him when stuff like this happened. The guy offered him a fancy biro with the Woolsey Piccadilly printed on it in gold. Thank you so much, Mr. Teach. Aw, come on, man. Call me Ed, please. He smiled slowly, deliberately. Oh, wow, Ed, thank you. He was beaming up at Ed, eyes sparkling. Ed wondered what time his shift finished. A cab home would take ages, but they were maybe 2 minutes walk from the Ritz? That'd be fun. Put the dazzle on this lad. Get a suite. Been a long time since he'd done that, hiding away for a couple days with someone enthusiastic. Could release some tension in better ways than anything Evelyn's healer could conjure up. Yeah, fuck opening a gallery in Islington. In fact, fuck Islington and everyone in it. He was doing this now instead. He made sure his fingers softly brushed the waiters as he took the pen from his hand, pitched his voice extra low. Who's it to? The guy was absolutely glowing. To Ryan, please. Amazing. Thank you so much, Mr. Teach. Sorry, Ed. No worries, no bother at all. As luck would have it, there was nothing to lean on. Can you just turn around for me a minute, mate? Thanks, Ryan. Ryan turned, then giggled sweetly over his shoulder as Ed used his back for a riding slope. Oh, I'm not Ryan. Sorry. My name's Oliver. Ryan's my husband. Ed's pen slipped. Not Ryan, whatever the fuck, Oliver. Didn't seem to notice the glitch. He actually proposed to me in front of that painting, right at the start of your exhibition, he went on, shy and oblivious. So it's sort of our painting now, you know? Like you have our song, it's our painting. Obviously it's not really, it's very much your painting, of course. But you know what I mean. Sorry, I'm babbling. The fuck? Not Ryan was 25, if that. Married? Ed tried to hide his shock, but it had all concentrated itself into the fucking mess he'd made of the R. He said. He was so tempted to draw cock and balls. He was so tempted to write fondest regards. But he wasn't quite that much of a prick. It's so lovely, isn't it, to think of it going round the world, you know, accruing all the significance, all the people who see it, and it'll be doing that forever, long after we've all gone. Incredible when you think about it. Not Ryan was all starry-eyed and breathless. Ed could feel his skin radiating warmth even through the card, through his shirt. There was a lump of rock in Ed's chest. He was 1 billion years old. He was ossifying. He finished writing, tapped Not Ryan to turn around, and handed him his fucking postcard back. Say something. Say something. He's been so nice. Don't be a bellend. Romantic guy, your husband. He managed to crack his face into about 30% of a smile. Oh, yes, he really is. Not Ryan clutched the postcard to his chest. Thank you so much, Ed. Ed nodded, and with as much dignity as he could muster, turned on his heel and fled. Ed stood in front of Hatchard's window display, looking at all the cool books. Dusk was falling, and the light spilling from the window made the shop inside look warm and enticing. He drummed his fingers lightly against his leg, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, and wondered idly if his back would ever stop hurting. The phone in his pocket buzzed with a text. Where the fuck are you, it said. The icon next to it was the picture Ed had drawn of Izzy, must be 20 years ago maybe. sort of an angry little scribble. "You're supposed to be opening a gallery in half an hour, you twat." Ed knew that. The giant scissors, yes. He still had heaps of time to get there, and it wasn't like they wouldn't wait. He was a living legend, for fuck's sake. He slowly tapped out a reply. "Have you read Normal People?" Send. That sparked a whole swarm of messages. Buzz, buzz, buzz. "Where are you? What condition are you in? Do you need me to come and pick you up?" "No, I fucking haven't. Too busy dealing with your bullshit." Ed turned his phone off and walked into the bookshop. People said it was good. He might get it. Oliver carried the postcard around in his pocket for the rest of his shift. Later, he stole a piece of clean A4 paper from the printer in the restaurant's little back office and folded it carefully around the card to protect it on the journey home to Lewisham. When Ryan got back at 7:45, Oliver presented it to him, barely able to contain his excitement. Ryan was so overcome, he pushed him tight up against their bookshelves and kissed him senseless. The painting was going to be exhibited again in Paris next spring, and they decided to get the Eurostar over to visit it. At that exact moment that Oliver was carefully putting the postcard on display with the help of a Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas fridge magnet, Ed, 4 miles north, was standing on a wobbly chair in his kitchen, reaching for the emergency packet of Golden Virginia that he kept hidden from himself on the top of the wall cabinets. He had to fish it out with a fork in the end, he'd stashed it so well. He grabbed the patchwork quilt from his bed, the half-empty bottle of Merlot from his kitchen table, and clambered out onto the flat roof of his building. Getting up there was a tricky business. You had to move the stuff out of the bathroom windowsill, then climb out and shin up the last bit of fire escape, which always made some not massively reassuring clanking noises the minute you put any weight on it. Worth it, though. Tonight was a roof night. When Ed got home earlier, the whole place had been in darkness. The heating had come on and gone off again, so the outside chill was already creeping back in. Bad insulation in these old conversions. The gallery had been very warm and very full of people, so the difference was pretty stark. He turned the clicky little wheel on the thermostat to force the radiators back on and warm the place up, then wandered around flicking lamps on. That was better already, more cheery. But still, he had that achy feeling of not knowing quite what to do with himself. The big unfinished painting glimmered at him through the low light, slick and inviting, but he couldn't work any more tonight. Tired. A bath? Maybe later. He cooked some pasta, stirred in a bit of pesto, and sat alone at the long refectory table watching It Takes Two on his laptop while he ate it. This was a very private thing. No one, absolutely no one in the world, knew he had a soft spot for a certain BBC One primetime celebrity dancing competition. Not that he was ashamed of it. Ed wasn't ashamed of anything. He'd do what he fucking liked, obviously. If someone had accused him of watching Strictly Come Dancing, he'd have said, "Yes, I fucking love Strictly, so what?" And he did love it, in a way that was painfully tender-hearted and completely lacking in irony. Not that anyone had asked him about it. He kind of wished they would. It'd be nice to share. Johannes was his favorite of the professionals, and Ed was glad to see that he had a good partner this year. Heart of fucking gold, that guy. He considered texting Evelyn to see if she agreed with the judges that the footballer's samba had lacked rotation, but he thought better of it. She wouldn't know what the fuck he was talking about. When the program had finished, he gently closed the laptop and looked around his home, the undercurrent of helplessness pouring back in. Not this, but not that either. It was so difficult sometimes to find a resting place for his cumbersome self. The solitary effort of it welled up inside him, salty and hot. That was when he'd realized it was a roof night. Outside was properly cold. Icy wind whipped through his hair and whispered in his ears. He pulled up his hood and silenced it. Rolling a cigarette was difficult with fingers that were already going numb, but he was practiced enough to manage. The quilt made a good cocoon, and he settled down on his back all wrapped up in it, smoking quietly as he watched the lights of the plains pass overhead, ashing into the wind. From the street far below, swishes of traffic and odd swoops of human voices drifted up to him. A runner's footsteps slapped the frosty pavement, receding into the distance. A fox screeched and scared the living shit out of him. All these years in London, and he still thought someone was being murdered every bloody time. The hard surface was doing wonders for his back, each vertebra sighing and slipping back into its notch, clickety-click like a thermostat wheel. There wasn't a song in his head. It was all frozen quiet now. He tapped his palm anyway, in case there's anything else that needed to stop. There were so many places in the world where you could actually see the stars and not just sense them. Places where the sky was black and not pink, violet, gray. At this moment, in this hemisphere, on this island, in this city, the Great Bear was up there looking down at him, looking for him. But there was too much spare light in between for them to find each other. In the meantime, the concrete and girders and the bricks and the mortar of the building under his aching back cradled the same body his mother had and pushed him up into the sky. He lay quite still and did his best to look the bear in the eye for a long, long time, until he realized he was starting to nod off and ought to go inside and put himself to bed. Because one chapter of Up, Down, Turnaround could never be enough, here is Chapter 2, A Chemical Reaction. Ed arrived at the library too early, his own fault. He'd woken up just before 5 and been completely unable to get back to sleep, even with his head fully under the pillow. Work seemed the best option for filling the dark hours before dawn, so he dragged his quilt downstairs and set to it, painting in his underpants until the sun came up. The Edward Teach story. He worked some detail into the mountains, loved it. The tracery of snow over the rough rock needed to be as fine as a cobweb. So he dug through his brush collection and come up with a nice rigger he'd got from Cornlesson on a whim and never used. Worked a treat. After an hour he stood back. Hated it with every fiber of his being. Always the way. He'd like it again in the morning, probably. Or next week. Eventually he got dressed and had a massive mug of tea for breakfast. Too sleepy for the bike, he'd strapped on his rucksack and jumped on the tube, and now he was here, sitting in the courtyard outside the British Library, waiting for them to open the doors at 9:30. He rubbed his tired eyes. The low bit of wall he was perched on was cold, and his jeans were a bit worn in the ass, so he jiggled his legs to keep warm, shoved his hands deep in his pockets. In the left-hand pocket of his jacket, he always kept a stash of those tiny little pencils, the ones they give you in the bookies or in IKEA. He gripped a couple in his fist, warm wood clacking together. They're awesome, these teeny pencils. They're free and you can sharpen them easily with your pocket knife. Something about the disposability of them appealed to Ed. Seemed generous even, as though they were inviting him to just draw and not think too much about what he was drawing. Doesn't matter, wear that graphite out. Go on, boy. One in maybe every 40, 50 sketches would strike him as something to turn into a bigger piece. It was important to think about what you were making your stuff out of all the time, that's what Ed reckoned. That's why he'd squirm a bit, even now, when people would call him an artist. He knew in his heart he was a craftsman first. Trained as a cabinet maker when he was a kid. Fucking excellent one, too. He has a lot of thoughts in his head, yes, and he's bloody fantastic at seeing patterns and connecting things up. But where he wins is that his hands are clever at making his thoughts into something that exists outside his brain. Something other people can look at and maybe have a bit of a think about on their own if they want. Or not. No skin off his nose if they don't. Once someone had said being able to draw was a curse for an artist because you don't have to think of other ways of expressing things. It was on the radio. Ed had never heard such flat-out wankery in all his life. Of course you don't need to be able to draw, but it's not a bad thing. That's just rude. Most of the time when he had a thought, it would want to be a painting, but sometimes it wanted to be a sculpture or a carving, or a cupboard, or a book, or a hole in the ground, or a light. Sometimes it wanted to be a whole room. Sometimes it wanted to be the second floor of an art gallery in Copenhagen. Once it had wanted to be a tiny little necklace. That was weird. He'd had to learn enameling. Art's not a thing made by a person. He doesn't think an artist is a thing that really exists. If it does, then the person looking at the thing he made is as much an artist as he is. Art is a thing that happens in the looking, in which case everyone's an artist. Artist just means human. Easy as. He just wishes the fucking Guardian would stop trying to get him to write an essay about it. Having said that, he does want the fourth plinth one day. So badly, oh man. It really gnaws at his gut, that one. He'll fucking get it too. He can do anything. When Yinka Ship in a Bottle was there, he'd gone up to Trafalgar Square every day for 78 days just to look at it, back when. 77 days? Waning Crescent. Yeah, 78 days. Went and looked at that for ages, then went to the secret cafe under the big church, the one that's always full of old people who know a good fucking place to sit and think, and maybe eat some soup when they see one. He went there and sat and thought and drew for 78 days. Sometimes he ate soup, sometimes not. It got so that they knew what kind of coffee he wanted without him having to say. He gave the girl at the till a drawing as a tip once, because he was having one of his bad days, and she clearly knew he was famous, but was kind enough not to mention it. Evelyn told him off for that, said it'd end up on eBay. What did he care about that? Girl probably needed the money, fair enough. Ed couldn't think too hard about that kind of thing. Too weird. So, he had this stash of tiny pencils in his pocket, which was lucky because he absolutely had to draw the incredible-looking blonde guy sitting across the courtyard from him. Otherwise, his heart would explode and he'd shit himself and die. And that couldn't happen. Where would Evelyn be then? And is? And the Foundry boys and all that. Too many people depended on Ed for their living for him to just say fuck it and casually explode outside the British Library one Wednesday morning. So that was that. Blondie was getting drawn. Stealthy as you like, he pulled out his sketchbook and a pencil. Several of the other pencils clattered out onto the floor, which was less than ideal, but luckily no one noticed. Ed took a breath and continued to play it extremely cool. He crossed his legs, looking like a deeply casual man about to write a shopping list, or do a puzzle maybe. Make notes on his important research, something official like that. Resting the book on his thigh, he pushed his hair out of his eyes and started to sketch. This guy, man, Ed had never seen a thing like him. His poor, tired brain was racing already just from seeing him sit there with his hair and his shoulders and his silly little leather satchel and canvas tote bag combo perched on the wall next to him. There was too much stuff for the library. What the fuck had he gotten there? His hair was a sort of coppery blonde. Ed'd probably have to underpaint it in like titanium white or some shit if he really wanted to get it down right. That or just bloody gild it, why not? He wouldn't struggle to remember the color, though. Fucking hell. Guy looked like he was emitting light. Blondie's face was downcast, completely absorbed in his Kindle. It had one of those covers on it that made it look like an old leather-bound book. He'd always wondered who those were made for, and now he had an answer. This guy. This exact guy. Ed was fucking overjoyed. He was almost giggling. Fascinating. A pair of fine-spun gold reading glasses were balanced delicately on Blondie's nose. His hair was kind of very slowly capsizing forward over his brow. Every so often he'd raise a hand to absently push it back, and it'd just kind of stay there, defying gravity, until the crisis point was reached and the slow collapse would start again. Now that Ed had noticed it, he couldn't help waiting for it to happen again, and that was making the whole thing absurdly funny to him. Wait for it. 3, 2, 1, there it goes. Floof. He had to bite his lip. Blondie had wide-set eyes and a slow blink, which, combined with a curiously flat nose that might even have been broken at some point and wasn't that an infuriating thought, gave him the appearance of an owl. Spitting image of a Ruru, Ed reckoned. Too odd to be cute in a conventional sense, and therefore even cuter. He always liked looking at people, but he couldn't think of a time he'd enjoyed looking at a person more. He was buzzing with it. Blondie's outfit was incredible, too. It was incredible. He was wearing brown brogues, which Ed usually considered the calling card of an asshole, but these were worn and lovely and suited him perfectly. His suit was made of velvety corduroy in a deep turquoise color, like a really heavily pigmented viridian. Underneath it, he wore a soft-looking jumper with an intricate Fair Isle pattern, repeating fragments of teal and madder rose and gold. Ed wanted to grab him by the lapels and bury his fucking face in it. Maniac didn't have a coat on, but he had a coral-colored scarf wound twice around his neck, cozy as a chick in a nest. He'd taken his right glove off to work the Kindle, and his hand looked strong and clean, a bright chunk of turquoise gleaming on his ring finger. Spectacular color sense Blondie had. Ed didn't know if it was physically possible for a human being to come just from having their visual cortex stimulated, but it felt like he was in danger of gathering some empirical evidence on the subject. Looking down at his own hands spread out across his sketchbook, Ed saw paint, mostly, and some dregs of tarry printing ink lining his cuticles and grained into his skin. Rings, cool but in need of polishing. Scarred knuckles he chose not to think about. tattoos blurring with age and mostly covered by the frayed black cashmere of his 2 long sleeves. This jumper had been really fancy once. Bottega Veneta gave it to him, if he remembered correctly, which he always did. But it was 5 years old now and a few sizes too big, and had thumb holes that he'd poked through himself with the blunt end of a fat paintbrush. His leather jacket was the same one he'd been wearing since the winter of 2003, softened with time and worn around all of its edges. He hadn't done anything with his hair today. In fact, the wind had paid it more attention than he had, tangling it up and sending the curls into knots around each other. Not optimal. Still, he usually liked not worrying too much about such things, and he wasn't going to get insecure about not being as gussied up as maybe he could be just because a dazzling man had landed in front of him. He glanced up from his drawing again, ready to gauge the distance between the fine edge of Blondie's ear and the pivot of his jaw, hoping it wasn't too obscured by that excellent scarf, and was smacked hard in the face by the hazel-colored gaze staring back. For a split second, their eyes caught and held, and their breath caught and held, and every last gasp of air fled, whoosh, out of the world. For the spark of a moment they clung there, suspended, and Ed thought surely he'd be knocked off his wall with the absolute insane, and he did mean insane, he knew insane and this was it, feeling of, oh, there you are, that crashed over him like an ocean wave, left his lungs flat and his ears ringing. He'd never, ever seen this guy before in his life. He was as sure of that as he was of anything, and yet... "I'm so glad you're here," said the voice of his own smallest self from where it hid, crouched underneath the broken piano at the very farthest corner at the very back of his skull. Ludicrous. It was so ludicrous he would have laughed at himself, if only he'd been able to feel his face. And yet, "I missed you so much." Blondie's mouth fell softly open like he was about to say something, ask a question, try to exhale. He kept staring at Ed, a deep crease appearing between his lovely eyebrows. Ed held his breath, utterly at a loss, unable to work out what was happening or what he was supposed to do about it. Then Blondie blinked one of his extra slow blinks, and another, and the moment snapped. Air rushed back into the courtyard. It swept over Ed and reminded him that he had a body, with dirty hands and an aching back and an ass that was freezing because he was sitting on a low red brick wall that was designed in the 60s by some guy named Colin and was wrangled over for 30 years by 1,000 forgotten counselors, and was rooted deep in cold, hard dirt still soaked in sweat and sump oil from the goods yard it used to be, just like he was rooted deep in cold, hard dirt still soaked in sweat and sump oil from the boy he used to be. His nose was cold. It was Tuesday morning. The sky overhead was clear ice blue, and the clouds said tomorrow morning would be made of filigree frost, delicate and beautiful. He breathed out, finally. Blondie tore his gaze away and pushed his glasses up his nose, blinking rapidly now. His Kindle became suddenly riveting again, except he was looking through it now, significantly more self-conscious than he'd been before. He uncrossed his legs, crossed them again the other way, shifted. He looked shaken. Bollocks. Bollocks, what the fuck was that? What the actual dicking fuck was that? A beat started up in his head, electronic. One of the thousands of little rescue operations that part of his brain habitually performed. It had drive, and Ed knew it from somewhere, even though he didn't know what it was yet. But for sure it'd go around and around and around until he... palm tap. Stop. The pencil, which his hand had forgotten it was holding, clattered to the floor. Bending to retrieve it, he dropped his sketchbook as well, retrieved that, gathered himself, deep breath. He tried to refocus on his drawing. He was just a normal guy, having a real normal one, no worries over here. Everything was fine. Sketching. He was sketching, exactly like he did every single day. Very quietly, right at the back of his head, the beat crept back. The drawing, it was looking all right, the drawing, despite the thing that had just happened to him. At least he'd seen Blondie's irises now, like spring growth, could draw them. Something about him kept the strokes of Ed's pencil quick and soft, wanting to record all the details his greedy eyes had seen. As he worked, he thought about light, about radiance, about the feeling, the flying, falling, and soaring flash flood of feeling that had rushed through him. He worked very fast, scrubbing in the angles of Blondie's hands, trying to pin down the inexplicable texture of his hair, trying to keep him somehow. He needed to take another look. Did he dare? Tiny sip of a look, like a nervous bird. Ridiculous. He'd never felt so ridiculous. He shook his head so a few more strands shielded his face and lifted his gaze from the page. Blondie's hair had collapsed again, but this time when he raised a hand to push it back, he raised his eyes too, sneaking another look at Ed before snatching it away, like a little kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Ed nearly laughed out loud. Even the possibility of being thought of like that, as something tempting, something wanted badly enough to be worth a transgression. There was a primness about Blondie that Ed desperately wanted to dishevel, but lurking underneath was this sense of restrained lunacy, like someone had tried to force a Victorian hot air balloon into a small cardboard box. It was right there in his eyes. You could rip a strip of tape off him somewhere, and he'd expand to be 100 times the size. Ed could feel it. Talk to me, he thought. Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. I'm right in front of you. The electronic beat kept beating, thundering along with his heart. Blondie was a lot of fascinating things, but subtle wasn't one of them. His gaze returned to Ed almost immediately. Say something, Ed thought, unsure which of them he was talking to. He risked half a smile, hoping it looked friendly and not deranged. Can't have been too bad. Blondie mirrored it. He mirrored it. Ed drew a breath to speak his first words of the day, unsure what was going to emerge, but willing to find out, when across the courtyard a man's voice rang out. Welcome, ladies and gents, to the British Library. Doors are now open. Blondie's attention snapped over to the uniformed security guard, who was now noisily removing the metal barriers from the main doors, bunch of keys jangling on his belt like a jailer. Ed's mouth shut like a trap. Bags open ready for inspection, if you please, he said, as the automatic doors heaved open for a bright new day. Come on in, you horrible lot. First in line was an ancient man leaning heavily on his walking stick. All right, Reg, how you doing? Said the guard as the man shuffled toward the entrance. Cold out, isn't it? Ed stayed rooted to the spot, still trying to find some words. Just one would do. One fishhook word to reel Blondie back in. Until then, he'd just have to live on this bit of wall, stuck. Blondie wasn't stuck, though. He was up and at him, Kindle flicked shut, glasses off, a flurry of motion, of bags and hair and flying scarf, like he thought there was a 2-minute window to get into the library before they shut the doors again. He was ferreting around in his satchel, sending out a confetti of notepaper bits, which he then had to chase around after in an undignified sort of half-crouch, hurrying to gather them up before the wind did. A quick turn to check he'd left nothing on the wall, his ridiculous overspill of belongings clutched tight to his chest. He looked toward the open door, then back to Ed. The straps of the tote fell off his shoulder, and he awkwardly tried to hoik the whole thing up. Ed's voice was still refusing to work. Blondie looked like he was having a similar problem, until he visibly steeled himself and flung out, "Happy studying!" Then he turned and dashed for the door, and wait a fucking minute, was that a Kiwi accent? It was. He'd stake his life on it. His heart knew it. He could already smell clean sea salt air laced with pollen from the sedges that grew around the bay. The background thrum of homesickness he lived with every day got better and worse at the same time. It sharpened itself into a compass needle pointing at this, admittedly quite odd, combination of words. A Kiwi. Maybe that could account for the chemical reaction that had just happened? No. When he first met Fang, he described the feeling as being like an aw, yay, not at all like the universe had tackled him to the ground and kissed him hard on the mouth. Sure, sometimes he'd make a special visit to the foundry when he didn't really need to go, just to listen to Fang talk. Ask him to explain the benefits of an alloy with a slightly higher ratio of tin to copper, and he'd go on for ages. All Ed had to do was sit there and listen, stirring his tea and purring internally. But that was just a combination of 85% homesickness and 15% being fond of Fang. No mystery there. He had to talk to Blondie, he just had to. A whole galaxy of possible words opened up for him now, all fighting for release from his mouth. Perfectly on time to see Blondie vanish through the doors, the queue of people waiting to get in thickening like a fortress behind him. Ed didn't live on the wall anymore. He leapt to his feet, shoved everything back in his pockets. A piece of notepaper blew up against his boot, so he grabbed that too. Might be his, why not? He sped across the courtyard in sort of an alternating walk and scamper, like a man trying to look extremely cool, despite having just discovered that there was a powerful magnet inside his heart that had just been activated for the first time. The 2 tables were set up inside the main doors, one on either side, each manned by a security guard with a walkie-talkie and a little torch. Ed knew the drill. You plunked your open bag down, the guard flashed a light inside and spent 1.5 seconds checking your stuff for hidden bombs or crouching murderers or the Loch Ness Monster or whatever it was they thought you might be smuggling in to try and damage their library with. Then they'd wave you through and that place was all yours. Ed bopped on his toes, trying to get a better look over the top of the queue in front of him. Blondie was just struggling to gather up his worldly goods, which looked like they'd exploded when he dumped them on the table. He thanked the guard politely, and that was definitely a Kiwi accent. Then he set off, arms full, across the main hall. There were 4 people in front of Ed. Only four, couldn't take long. One guy didn't have anything with him for them to inspect, and he whizzed through like a legend. Then 2 kids, students by the look, rucksacks heavy with devices and wires and water bottles. Ed watched over their heads as Blondie scurried across the tiled floor up ahead, willing him to look back just for a moment, so he could make a gesture to wait or something, anything. He didn't even care if it made himself look stupid. Just look back, please. But Blondie was heading for the stairs down to the lockers, and he didn't look back, not once. The bottom was slowly falling out of Ed's stomach. One student filed through while the other lingered, with apparently many questions that only this particular security guard was equipped to answer for her. Fuck. Only one more person remained in front of him in the queue. One person stood between him and sprinting after Blondie, like Billy Crystal on New Year's Eve, so he could do something. He didn't know what yet, but he was great at thinking up plans on the fly. No worries. The last person in the queue appeared to be, as far as Ed could tell, old Father Time. He had a small suitcase which he took approximately 1 month to wrestle up onto the table, and another month to unzip. This was unbearable. He was being tortured. Blondie's golden head was disappearing down the stairs. It was okay. He was clearly heading for the lockers, and it always took a minute to find an empty one, set a code, get a hold of a little see-through carrier bag, and shove all your stuff in it. That shit took ages. He'd definitely have time to catch up. Defo, for sure. Yep. Why was this taking so long? He chewed his lip, trying not to shout, "What the fuck are you all doing to me?" Finally, old Father Time finished, and Ed bounded forward, skidded to a halt in front of the table, and threw his rucksack down onto it with a walloping level of enthusiasm that, with hindsight, was probably his first mistake. And that was Chapter 2 of Up, Down, Turnaround by Shearwater.
Let's give Andrea a hand for her first podfic narration. That was Up, Down, Turnaround by Shearwater. I've dropped a link to the fic in the show notes, so please be sure to give the wonderful writing a comment and a kudos. Also, to help show the world that there's still an audience for our flag-related content, give the podcast a rating and review. Beans knows. It's really important, and it makes a difference. For memes and other Our Flag related hilarity, follow us on Instagram at Our Flag Means Fanfiction, all one word. And remember, do creations, be cringe, commit crime. Bye!